The Chinese military is ramping up its interest in Australia's military exercises, and it's exerting its increased stamp on the Pacific region by sending a second spy ship to the coast off Queensland. The high-level live-fire military exercises, called Talisman Sabre, are operating off Shoalhaven Bay training area near Rockhampton. They're involving Australian, US and Japanese military, along with South Korean, New Zealand and Canadian and even some British personnel. The Chinese sent one highly sophisticated intelligence vessel last week through Torres Strait, and another one has come down through the Pacific over the past few days. The spy ships are staying outside of Australian territorial waters, and the Defence Minister Peter Dutton says while China's interest is not unexpected, he was surprised that Beijing had sent two vessels, and he expects them to adhere to international law. Joining me now from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute again is Michael Shoebridge. Michael, what are these Chinese ships up to?
Well, Chris, it's fascinating. So these two Chinese military spy ships, they're big electromagnetic vacuum cleaners. But as they float around off this seven-nation military exercise, they're diligently observing all the international laws that those same ships and the bigger PLA Navy break every day in the South China Sea, around Taiwan and off the coast of Japan. So they're demonstrating breathtaking hypocrisy because they clearly understand the laws that they break and they're diligently obeying them because they think it's to their advantage off the coast of Queensland.
Yeah, well, Peter Dutton says they should obey the law. You're suggesting they're breaking it. I was going to ask you, how would China react if we did the same thing during their exercises? I mean, presumably that's what the US Navy would be doing all the time.
Oh, no, I mean, they're diligently following the laws as they float off the Queensland coast. But right now in the South China Sea and around Taiwan and close to Japan, the Chinese Navy are breaking those same laws. So they're telling us they understand those laws and they'll break them when they want to.
Yeah, no, good point. The hypocrisy is obvious there. But what about when the Chinese do have military exercises in the Straits of Taiwan, for instance? Presumably American vessels shadow those and try and pick up whatever they can?
Absolutely, but operating in accordance with international law. I think the big picture about this exercise, though, is this is a deterrent message to Beijing, and it's actually useful to have these PLA electromagnetic vacuum cleaners there, trying to see how seven powerful militaries are cooperating in ways that are specifically designed to deter Beijing from doing stupid things with its military.
Yeah, well, I just want to explore another issue related to China as well. I want to refer to a vodcast conducted by Tony Abbott. We showed an excerpt of that when it came to the National Cabinet earlier in the program. But he had a bit to say about the China trade relationship as well. And he said he talked about China's trade actions against Australia and also about how Donald Trump stood up to China. Have a look.
My deep anxiety, Nick, is that the contest that the Western world is now entering with communist China is going to be every bit as difficult as the long contest that the West had with the old Soviet bloc, because while the old Soviet Union was certainly a first-rate military power, it was a third-rate economy. What we're dealing with now is a first-rate economy that's rapidly developing a commensurate military strength. And of course, there's 1.4 billion Chinese, whereas even in the heyday of the Soviet Union, Russia had about half the population of the United States.
I think the realisation that China is a problem, that it is still a communist country, that the Cold War in a sense never went away, has heightened, of course.
Yeah, we'll leave that there, Michael. But the point here is talking about this in Cold War terms and saying that it would be even more difficult than the original Cold War with the Soviets because of the additional population and wealth.
Well, I think he's making a really important point, and one of the really powerful things that Tony Abbott said was to not talk about it as a US-China thing. As we saw in the G7 Plus meeting in Cornwall, this is a much wider challenge with many more countries having a shared interest in dealing with this aggressive, challenging China. That's what we're seeing off the coast of Queensland. 7 powerful nations cooperating together on the China challenge. And it is a long-term thing, but I think we've got more power and confidence now than we told ourselves just 2 years ago.
All right. Now, Michael, one other issue I thought you might have a view on is the Western Australian government. We talked about last week, how some of their entertainment facilities and the like were being barred from groups that they didn't like politically, including the Australian Christian lobby. But there are reports now of blowback from Taiwan, that the Western Australian government's been pushing back groups from Taiwan. Now, this shouldn't be happening, should it? And if they're doing it, there would be an attempt to presumably appease Beijing.
Yes, and this is another example of the real dangers of having different policies at the federal level and the state level. State premiers are not equipped to deal with national security in the way the federal government can because they don't have the agency's information and advice. And having a seam driven between us where it's somehow bad to have cultural connections to Taiwan is a real example of that. So it's a really backward step, and it's a dampening of freedom of expression, which we should be doing the opposite on.
Exactly. Thanks for joining us again, Michael. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
Michael Shoebridge there from the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.